In addition to today being the first day of the World Cup, it also marks 1 year since North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality began its investigation into a chemical called Gen X in the Cape Fear River. While this topic has gained a ton of national press in the last year, many people don't realize that fluorinated chemical contamination has been a threat to public health for decades. These chemicals are associated with the production of Teflon and Scotchgard, which have been used in households since the 1960s. While this timeline highlights Gen X contamination, there are currently several other harmful fluorinated compounds in drinking water sources throughout the country. We wanted to make a video laying out the timeline of the problem and the progress that's being made. So without further ado, here we go. 1980. DuPont, the chemical manufacturing company, began discharging perfluorooctanoic acid, known as PFOA or C8, into the Cape Fear River in Fayetteville, North Carolina. DuPont purchased PFOA from 3M, which is another chemical manufacturer out of Minnesota. PFOA is an ingredient that's used during the manufacturing of Scotchgard, Teflon, and other heat/water resistant products. March 2002. DuPont and EPA established a temporary threshold level of 14,000 parts per trillion for PFOA. This agreement, made under the Safe Drinking Water Act, had a condition that required DuPont to pay for alternative sources of drinking water for affected users if the drinking water samples test higher than the agreed upon threshold. October 2002. 3M discontinues the manufacturing of PFOA because they recognize its harmful effects on the environment. Later in 2002, DuPont began making the chemical at its Fayetteville Works plant. 2005. EPA penalizes DuPont with an over $10 million lawsuit for failing to report information to EPA about substantial risk of injury to human health and the environment. EPA also required DuPont to give $6.25 million to fund various environmental programs. At the same time, DuPont and other PFOA manufacturers all came to an agreement to voluntarily phase out production by 2015. 2009. DuPont began to voluntarily use Gen X as a substitute for PFOA at the Fayetteville plant. DuPont claimed this substitute was a safer alternative to PFOA. January 2009. DuPont informed EPA that they would begin manufacturing Gen X at the Fayetteville plant. A few weeks later, EPA entered a separate consent order with DuPont to address the discharge of Gen X into the air and water. DuPont was able to find a loophole that stated that the consent order does not apply to substances produced as byproducts of other processes. This means that Gen X could be discharged without needing to follow the terms of the consent order. March 2009. A new consent order between the EPA and DuPont under the Safe Drinking Water Act required that the threshold of PFOA levels need to be reduced from the previous threshold of 14,000 to 400 parts per trillion. This new order also states that the company must supply alternative water sources to areas with PFOA levels exceeding the new threshold. 2012. The North Carolina DEQ approved a water discharge permit to DuPont. Then, the North Carolina Science Advisory Board recommends setting a max limit of 1,000 parts per trillion for PFOA in the groundwater. Later that year, scientists find Gen X in the Cape Fear River for the first time. 2015. DuPont creates a spin-off company from their division of performance chemicals called Chemours. Chemours is now in charge of manufacturing and discharging fluorinated contaminants. 2016. A team at North Carolina State released a report detecting Gen X in Cape Fear water. Contamination was associated with discharge from the Chemours plant upstream of the drinking water source. NC State researchers go so far as to test various filtering methods to remove Gen X from the drinking water. As it turns out, Gen X is a harder chemical to filter out from the water than the previous chemical, PFOA. 2017. The state of North Carolina's DEQ begins investigating Chemours' actions involving discharging its water waste into the Cape Fear River. Chemours then reveals that it has been discharging various fluorinated compounds since 1980 and announces it will capture, remove, and safely dispose of them rather than discharge it into the river. Chemours announces that it has found and stopped discharging Gen X into the Cape Fear River. Today, June 14, 2018, the Gen X dilemma in Wilmington, North Carolina remains unsolved. Community members have rallied to make the nation aware of this public health debacle. Additionally, the North Carolina House and Senate are trying to pass a wonky bill that only addresses one of the several dangerous chemicals in the Cape Fear watershed. Sponsors of the North Carolina Water Safety Act have essentially created a bill that caters to polluters. While The North Carolina Water Safety Act is aiming to regulate Gen X contamination. It fails to mention other fluorinated compounds. This means that chemours will only be held accountable to address Gen X contamination while continuing to produce and allow other fluorinated chemicals to run rampant in the Cape Fear River. Our water nerds believe that Gen X should not necessarily be the star of the show. The entire class of fluorinated compounds need to be addressed when discussing North Carolina's water quality and the absence of a comprehensive regulation. There's a laundry list of fluorinated compounds that the North Carolina State Laboratory detected in their initial water testing. Gen X is easy to say and sounds intimidating, but that doesn't necessarily make it the most dangerous fluorinated compound in Cape Fear's water. If you would like an in-depth analysis of anything in this video or would like to see us cover a water quality topic that's important to you, drop us a comment below and make sure to subscribe for credible breaking news coverage of this very important issue.